Good morning, everyone. And so I'd like to talk about a topic which is actually in the area of media. My research work is, my background is electrical and computer engineer, but now I'm working in the area of interactive media. And that means that, for example, in the faculty which I'm currently in Kyoto University, it's quite multidisciplinary. We have some faculty who are engineering, some who are artists, and some who are, for example, cultural and social scientists. So this field is very multidisciplinary. It kind of is a field where creativity is kind of core. One of the aims, for example, of graduate school is kind of, 5-second byline is creating media innovators. So for creative society. So to look at the use of design plus engineering and social science to develop new forms of creative interaction and systems, especially for creative society and creative industries. So let's look again at the media itself. So actually Marshall McLuhan in the 60s wrote the book Understanding Media, which was kind of a very pioneering book, which people didn't really understand the actual effect on our society, but he could predict almost everything that's happened in the 60s, so more than 40 years ago. And one of his definitions saying that, he's saying in the 60s we live in the speed of electric involvement that creates an integral whole of both private and public awareness. We live today in the age of information and of communication because electric media instantly and constantly creates a total field of interacting events which all men participate. Of course it meant women too. But the most important thing is he could understand that we are reaching a new point in society. We have instant and global connectivity, and it's going to radically change our society. And basically what he predicted has come true or is coming true. So media, so Marshall McLuhan could realise media is much more than just the traditional sense of telecommunication, traditional media such as newspaper and books and computing. He really saw it as our extension of senses into the world. And so we can look at natural and humanistic ways of interfacing with both people, remotely as well as locally, and with machines, and this will bring out new ways of communication between people, between cultures and races, between humans and machines, and even between machines and machines. So if we have a look at our basic interaction, this is how most people use digital media now. So it's behind a screen. So your brain is forced to bridge the gap between reality and the virtual reality, computer world. And of course, in the 80s, there was a big promise of virtual reality. There was too much hype, and that's why the field didn't really reach its potential. But one of the big problems is when you create virtual reality, you have very little connection with the real world. And there's been a lot of research to show that people do not find that very useful for either work or play. So now these are kind of the new paradigms that we're looking at in the field of computing and media. So instead of put the human inside virtuality, to bring the digital world and virtuality into our physical space, which can mean ubiquitous computing, where the whole physical space is embedded with intelligent computing machines, or augmented interaction, where we filter the real world with virtual reality. And you can see the kind of viewpoint that we had that we've changed our viewpoint of what is media and what is computing. So this this movie here. Has everyone seen this movie? 2001: Space Odyssey. That's it, so you can see in '68 when they made this movie, this was imagined. This is what they imagined would be the future of communication. So there's a man there. He's sitting in front of the screen, and there's a kind of camera, and he's speaking to his family on the planet Earth. And actually, this already happened more than 10 years ago. We already invented that future. But the problem is, we realise that this kind of interaction behind screens has some disadvantage. There's a separation from a real world and virtual world, and 2D collaboration is not ideal because we are more attuned to interacting in 3D space. So 10 years later, this is the kind of concept that people are thinking. How would we interact with computers and media? And this is the original and I think the best Star Wars movie. And you can see, in this case here, there's no screen. So people are imagining that we have 3D communication, and the virtual world becomes an integral part of the physical space. So for example, if you're working together, to be able to point and gesture and touch objects as if they're real is an important tool for collaborative work and collaborative play. Then jump again another decade or so, and Professor Hiroshi Ishii in the MIT Media Lab was one of the pioneers to coming up with the concept of tangible interfaces and showing that we should not only bring virtual world into physical space, but we should interact with it in a physical manner, tangible interaction. And he developed various pioneering systems, which for example, the TerraVision and Pinwheels, which I probably don't have time to go into detail now, but were works where showing that you could embed the physical objects with computing and virtual media. And studies of such tangible interfaces where the virtual world is expressed or can be directly manipulated through physical interaction show that this has a lot of benefit. Donald Norman, who's a very famous designer, showed that physical objects make us smart. They act as information artifacts and actually assist cognition. So being able to physically interact actually, in his words, make us smart. And objects aid in collaboration. Physical objects establish a shared meaning, and they also can increase understanding, serve as a cognitive artifact. So, then also in the 80s, a psychologist, Balki, did some very good and important work to show that humans, as social creatures, find physical interaction and touch essential for enjoyment of life. So again, this is another viewpoint that we need to make systems which not only provide virtual media, but also the physical aspect. So now, some of the areas that I'm interested in and we're looking into in my lab with my students is how can we use such media to create new kinds of understanding and communication, not just pure information, but to also explain subtle emotions and the intended mind. And a lot of this cannot be expressed through logical or purely verbal communication. So how can we create new kinds of media that could embed all of our senses, including, for example, clothing as media, taste and smell as interactive media. And this will allow new kinds of expression and culture. So basically some of the issues which are involved include using mixed reality technology for network interaction, both in the physical and real world, creating new kinds of multimodal communication, which involve all of our senses, all of our 5 senses, and also how can we use computing and media for bringing positive effect of light and social bonding in human societies. This is kind of that aim to design creative media. And so a lot of computer scientists are now very interested in this topic. So ACN, one of saying computer science, probably the most important society, now is specifically has a lot of special issues and journals on this topic. I just want to quickly define the concept of mixed reality, which actually was defined by Milgram. It's a relatively recent concept. I think about 97 was his paper. And he defined it was the first time the word mixed reality came into the literature. He defined it as the spectrum between real environment, which we live in, and virtual environment, which we also are very familiar with. But augmented reality is where we take the virtual world and embed it into the physical world. And augmented virtual reality is the opposite, where we real-time capture the real world and embed it into the physical space. So I want to show some examples of this. So in this case here, this is a system which can do real-time augmented virtuality. It's a little bit old. I did this five years ago, but it's just showing that at least at the research level, a lot of these problems are getting solved or being solved. Of course, making real product is a different story. But so we can, in this case here, a system called 3D Live can capture any object or humans in almost real time, which means 30 frames per second or more. And with such a system, you can have remote, fully 3D communication with one or more partners. So in this case here is one of my students, and she's seeing a live virtual avatar of another student in another location. And I'll show you a video of this now.
Augmented reality refers to the introduction of virtual content into the real world. Here, a cartoon frog is superimposed onto the card so that it appears to be a real part of the scene. Typically, the user wears a head-mounted display with a camera attached to the front. The images from the camera are passed to a computer, which introduces the virtual content and displays the image to the user in real time. In order to make the object appear to be a real part of the scene, the correct view must be determined in each frame. We associate the object with a two-dimensional cardboard marker. Image processing techniques are then used to calculate the geometric relationship between this marker and the scene. The image is thresholded, connected regions are identified, and their contours are found. If the region matches the marker template, we accurately measure the position of the corners. These corners uniquely identify the position of the marker in the scene, allowing us to introduce the virtual content. In this project, we extend this technique by introducing virtual live video content into the world, as can be seen here. Given that we know the position of the marker in the scene, the main technical problem is to generate the appropriate view of the subject or actor for each frame. The bulk of our paper describes a novel shape of silhouette algorithm which can generate an arbitrary view of the scene. The input to the system consists of 15 simultaneous video streams. 14 cameras are placed around the subject and one is placed above his or her head. In order to generate an arbitrary viewpoint, we construct an image-centered three-dimensional model. The broad principles of the algorithm are as follows. Consider virtual view generation for this three-dimensional teapot based on measurements from several cameras. The first step is to classify each pixel in each image as being either part of the teapot or the background. We project light rays through the pixels which are classified as part of the teapot. This defines the minimal region of space in which we know the teapot must be located. We repeat this process for the second camera. This defines another region. Hence, we now know the object must be contained within the intersection of these two regions. Each camera carves away the space until what remains is a representation of the shape. We can then define a virtual camera as a new position. Project light rays through the pixels of the virtual camera and find their intersection with the object. The colour of the virtual pixel is estimated by considering the position of this intersection in the real camera images. Our generate novel views of this kind at 30 frames per second. Furthermore, it is extremely robust and requires no special hardware. We can generate novel views from any angle. As you can see here, we can capture more than one actor or actress at one time. As this sequence shows, we can also buffer the video streams to disk and introduce special effects such as freeze frame. The principal interest of our lab is in enhancing remote collaboration. Current video conferencing technologies cannot fully express non-verbal cues, and remote communication suffers as a result. Hence, our main application is for video conferencing.
Hi, I'm here for the audition.
Okay, what's your name?
My name is Joe West.
Okay, Joey, could you tell me something about your previous acting experience?
Yes, I
Our
was...
system realistically introduces the content into the real world together with appropriate 3D sound, which solves many of these problems.
I was the part of the donkey. It was a great role.
We can also use the system to generate live 3D avatars for interactions in virtual spaces. We present the example of a guide to a virtual art gallery. Notice how the actor here can gesture to objects in the scene, interaction that is extremely natural. Since we have generated a 3D model of the actor, realistic occlusion is also easy to implement. With our current camera configuration, the accuracy of the depth map is of the order of a few millimeters in the real world. You can imagine an architect walking his customers through his building and discussing the details with them. We also consider augmented reality interaction with a collaborator in a virtual environment. We can use the tangible card marker to pick the collaborator up and move him aside. We can change the virtual environment by turning over pages in a book. And then we can replace him. We have developed these tangible interaction techniques into a game. We use a marker to try to drop objects onto his head. The collaborator in the virtual environment attempts to jump out of the way in real time.
You can see that this 3D capture can allow the the interaction where the collaborator is seen as a real-time 3D object in your physical space, which allows new kind of interactions between the collaborators. And so you can see, at least at a research level, we can now do real-time 3D communication. And of course, since this work was done, there's been some improvements. For example, we don't need any more of the green background. We can use just natural background for the capture. And also, we don't need those black markers anymore. We can track natural features using natural feature tracking. But there's a lot of maybe boring technical computer science details, which, at least for on a conceptual level, the system is the same. So that was a system where you could see what was augmented virtuality, where we could in real time take the real world and put it into the virtual world, and then you create interaction through augmented virtuality space. And as I mentioned, the other way we can merge real world and virtual is using augmented reality, where we can take the virtual world and make it part of our physical environment, and then interact through the physical space, but have the virtual objects embedded there as if they were part of the environment. So this system here, called Human Pac-Man, was an attempt to make such augmented reality interaction in a wide area physical space. Now basically the idea is to embed the natural physical world ubiquitously with, in this case, a kind of game concept. But of course it can be applied for any type of scenario that could be imagined. In this case here, to show how can we make such interaction, so I decided to base it on a simple game of Pac-Man. And in this case here, the people, the players are physically in the real world, and their bodies are connected in real time to the virtual game characters. So the basic concept is the player has a wearable computer, and unfortunately, still we are stuck with these head-mount displays. The next big step for augmented reality will be when we can have either very small displays, which is going to need a big leap in optics, or to create 3D hologram. And so, but basically the idea is that as the person moves their body, their virtual character will move correspondingly in the virtual space, and then he or she will see the real world embedded with the augmented objects. So you can see here, the person is playing as the kind of Pac-Man, and then as he walks through, moves his body, he collects the cookie. Okay, so this video will show a demo which was first made for indoor. Of course, the whole point is to make wide area outdoor interaction, but just to show the system, you can see the basic setup with the indoor version. Here's the wearable computer, which is not very wearable. It's at 3.5 kilos, but this is lab work. Then you can see the real maze corresponds with the virtual maze in real time. So this is that kind of embodiment of physical space and virtual space. So as you can see, as the human player walks through, they can see the augmented cookies and collect them in just by moving their body. So the real world becomes embedded with such virtual objects. And there's also other techniques, for example, using physical devices which have embedded sensing to create interaction in the virtual space. The idea is that physical world action directly corresponds to virtual world action. I'll show you a video which is in the outdoor space. I'm sorry this is from TV, but they filmed it very well. And so you can see here's outdoor version, which actually uses much more sophisticated tracking. And we had to do a lot of sensor fusion. But you can see even for wide area outdoor space, we can create quite smooth augmented reality. So the virtual objects appear to be in the physical space. So I began to think that the potential for this also might be not only for human-to-human interaction, but if you can use such system to create even new types of interspecies communication. So this system here is taking that concept which I just said about augmented reality and interactive gaming with humans, but could we make also new interactions, for example, with animals or pets? This system here is called metazooludens. And the idea is, can we create new interactive system for human and pets? And also, I'm interested in this kind of concept of the virtual world can become a kind of equalizer. So this is a kind of game of cat and mouse, except now the human becomes the mouse. And I think virtual reality allows new kinds of interaction which is not possible in the physical world. In this case here, the hamster in the real world chases a bait. Actually, it's not food bait. It's a tunnel on a robotic arm. And this corresponds to kind of a giant avatar of the hamster chasing the human. And this loop between real world and virtual world allows a new form of communication between humans and animals. So I'll show the video of the system here. Here is the virtual 3D game environment in the virtual world. This avatar corresponds to the human, and this is corresponding in real time to the hamster. And the aim of the game is for humans to run away from the hamster. But we have an infrared tracking system to track the hamster, and we have a robotic system which not only controls the robotic arm representing the human avatar, but also controls the terrain, because the hamster actually experiences the same terrain as in the virtual environment. But we make it very slow changing, otherwise it would be too difficult for the hamster. So you can see this virtual terrain, the virtual terrain will correspond to the real terrain. So this is kind of like a window into the virtual space. And in real time, we track the hamster movement, and this corresponds to the pet avatar. And actually, we had in our university, of course, we have a Department of Biological Sciences. We had 2 graduate students who did some so-called user studies, and to show that the hamster would freely enter the system on average higher than at this, when the system began. So they will show some preference for entering the system freely. Of course, this is not really a communication, it's kind of a one-way communication. So I'm still very troubled about this. How can this be extended to real bidirectional communication? But that is kind of future research which I want to try to do. So I'm just checking the time. So as I mentioned, basically from an engineering viewpoint, we've solved a lot of the problems of information transmission. So we can almost perfectly transmit, of course text is almost perfect, and also audio. In fact, we've gone beyond perfect. So as you might know, Sony introduced Super Audio CD a few years ago. But has anyone ever listened to a Super Audio CD in this audience? And we're in Japan, where these gadgets are very... Okay, so no one, right? So you can see basically we've gone beyond the need of perfect, or what humans would think is perfect transmission of information. Super Audio CD was a flop because basically nobody needed 128-bit audio and all the, basically CD and MP3 was enough. So now people are realizing that although we've solved a lot of the information problem, a lot of the communication gap is for non-logical and non-verbal communication. So going from a paradigm of sharing information to sharing experience. And this is where we need to look at how can we not only communicate with audio and video and text, but also with our other senses. A big one we're looking at now is touch. So, again on the topic of animals, but maybe I'm an animal lover, but so the first system that I developed was how could we communicate with our pet remotely. Because you cannot call up your pet, you cannot call up and talk to your pet, at least not currently. So the only way really is to communicate with touch. So this system here was trying to look at can we have human to pet communication remotely. And the idea is that a human could be in a work or a different location and allowing the human to communicate by touch with the pet. And I'll show you the video here of the system.
Phenomena in modern urban life contributes to high levels of stress and unhappiness. We are busy each day traveling to many places and are forced to spend more of our time away from home. This creates a separation between humans and pets. Pets spend more time away from their owners without interaction. Humans have always lived with animals as social companions. Pets have been integrated into our families and have even helped in work tasks such as hunting, transportation, and farming. In today's modern life, one of the few things that brings warmness to our hearts and homes are pets. Pets satisfy humans' need to nurture. Virtual pet devices such as Tamagotchi and Aibo aim to provide humans with intelligent social companions traditionally provided by pets. However, studies have shown that although there is a kind of psychological connection, This kind of interaction is not the same as real companionship that grows between human and real pet animals. There is a need to feel the presence of our pets and have real emotional interaction, no matter where we are, whether traveling or at work. We present Poultry Internet, a system for remote human-pet interaction. Poultry are one of the most poorly treated animals in modern society, being mainly used as a food source and living in terrible conditions. Studies have shown that poultry are capable of feeling pleasure. They also have a high level of cognition and feelings. Chickens benefit from touch-based interaction with their owners and lead happier lives. It has been shown that mittens that are deprived of human contact are likely to be more anxious and prone to poor egg-laying.
But in Southeast Asia, traditionally people have kept chickens as pets in their backyards. In the traditional Asian villages, there were always chickens around, children were playing with them. So we wanted to really recreate that kind of traditional Asian-style pet.
In today's world, chickens still fill the role of animal companions, and our system keeps this possible. Poultry Internet is made up of two subsystems. At the office system, the user is able to feel the presence of the pet and interact with it through a pet doll interface. At the backyard system, the pet wears a special haptic jacket, which reproduces the touch from its owner via data received from the Internet. We have embedded a touch sensing and wireless receiver circuit inside the pet doll. The touch sensing circuit is built upon the technique of capacitive touch sensing, where the area of human touch distorts an electric field and therefore registers a touch. We specially designed a pet jack for the chicken, with embedded vibrating actuators and wireless Bluetooth module. This jacket recreates a convincing human touch for the chicken. Design considerations were incorporated to ensure that the jacket does not restrict the movement of the chicken and is not a significant burden to its movement. The human user interacts with the chicken through a pet doll interface. The interaction is illustrated here with the LED lights on a haptic jacket. The chicken feels the touch and engages the human user. The chicken's response is captured with the camera registration. The human users enjoy the system, but in order to determine how the chicken liked the system, we asked it. To do this, we conducted a red door, blue door test based on the Dunking principle. We put the chicken in a common corridor where it is free to choose between entering the red door, blue door, or remain in its place. If the chicken enters the blue door, we will remotely touch it through the pet doll interface. On the other hand, if the chicken goes into the red door, we would not do anything to it. The study allowed the chicken to interact and engage in the mediated touch interaction with the owner, or opt out of the experience and be left alone. Overwhelmingly, the chicken demonstrated a strong desire to interact with the system. The chicken enjoyed the experience.
So actually, this system, one of the reasons I chose poultry is, of course, one reason I like poultry. I used to play with my grandfather's garden with poultry, but when we started this work, we realized that poultry actually have a very positive effect for touch, and even in some poultry farms, they have kind of artificial arm, which actually has some positive effects. So, but this system could not work, for example, for cat. I think for cat, but generally not actively touch, especially for such a system. And the other thing is, since we've done this work, we're still having to continue doing the studies we've shown there, because still we're not sure whether the preference of the poultry was maybe the human will put on the jacket. Maybe that was causing the preference. So still these results is not conclusive about whether it was preferring the jacket or preferred the human would, when they entered the room, the human would come into the room. And also, we have to more carefully study, make some study to eliminate that factor. Okay, so I think I'm a little bit out of time, so I'm not sure all of these slides. But currently, the new work I'm doing on this is actually now for using such touch interface for human-to-human communication. And I think I've talked about this already, so I'll skip this slide. But basically, the idea is as I mentioned, we can already do a remote video and audio communication and text, but is it possible to have a kind of a media which can effectively reproduce the feeling of touch communication? So in this case here, some of the goals that we have to study, and still we don't have all the answers. Can we reproduce touch and for example, hugging, feeling remotely? How does it compare to real touch? And how does it enhance remote communication? Is this really something which would be benefit for humans? So we want to make some studies to look at parameters, to look at the issues which will be beneficial. And also, there's also a lot of, once you've developed these systems, there's also a lot of issues in security, trust, privacy, ethics, which come about as well. So previous work has shown that in general, touch is very important, real touch that is. So some previous relevant works, this work here by Botvinnik showed that with this rubber hands experiment, showed that with the right context and right representation, the human was convinced of a real hand, even though it was a rubber hand, which shows that it is possible we could create an artificial system to give the feeling of a real human touch. And probably, I think everyone here, expert, knows about this work, but as you know, there's a work of Harlow in Nature of Love, showed that when no physical contact is possible, artificial touch is better than none. So this means, we feel this means that, for example, if father or mother is, for example, I'm in Kyoto now, my daughter is in Tokyo, there is no physical contact possible. So something would be better than nothing. Okay, so I shouldn't go into details of this because the audience here is expert in such matters. But this is showing why touch is important for human communication. Now also particularly related to why hugging is important with parent and child relationships, because the first scenario that I like to consider is parent and child communication. And then, so Spitz found that children younger than age 2 who are isolated from their mothers will lose interest in the environment and become unresponsive to affection. And in the worst case, this could even lead to death. But very controversial. Of course, they did not do this test in the lab. It was based on, you know, all orphanages. And, but the work is showing, at least shows there is definite benefit for, especially in young infants, for touch. And again, Balby showed that children who suffer long-term or repeated separations during the first 3 years of life are usually permanently disabled mentally. And then other various works have showed about the importance of hugging and touch. Of course, infants communicate with touch, which is why I want to look at human parent-to-child relations. And some researchers argue that maternal touch can compensate for lack of verbal and facial emotional communication by depressed mothers with their infants. Okay, so of course we cannot solve all these problems, and this is just the very first step, but the idea is that can we make a system which can add to the communication of course we can still have audio and video, but can we add that with touch as well, especially with a very bad effect of modern society where people are very constantly busy at work and maybe they not have enough time with their children. Also, the children are so busy with school and cram school or something like this. So here's this system concept. We have the father or mother which will hug a doll, which will have sensor, and on the other side, the child will have the same sensation on his or her body as on the input doll. Of course, this should be bi-directional, right? So the system is envisaged, it's bi-directional, not just one way. Okay, so this is the base. This is a system which has been developed. We made a doll which has sensors which is very responsive to the normal force of pressure of human touch. The material is quantum tunneling composite, and this system is the idea is that, for example, mother is working and that she can carry a small doll with her at work, and then she could be talking to the daughter maybe through internet chat, video chat, but still the child can feel the same effect on her body through this system.
In human communication, body gestures and touch can sometimes more deeply explain the intended mind. Through hugs, we can spread our spoken language to the language of wider expression. We share hugs with our loved ones, expressing not only love, but also security, confidence, trust, and care. Especially in parent-child relationships, hugging is an important way to communicate and express feelings of loving and care. However, various situations in life keep us away from our loved ones. Hugging Pajama bridges this physical gap between distant loved ones. In times of need and loneliness, a warm hug from a loved one far away provides us with encouragement. Hugging Pajama is a mobile hug communication system that provides a realistic hug sensation and emotional display. It consists of an input hugging device, air-output modules embedded in the pajama, and color-changing accessories. Using the input device, parents can convey emotional expressions to the child through the color-changing modules. In the same way, parents can send hugs to their child through the embedded air-output modules. Air-output modules placed in the pajama recreate the hugging feeling. These modules are individually controlled by touching each of the corresponding sensors on the input device. In this actual scenario, mother is shown hugging the input device, enabling mother to tuck in the child for bedtime. The soft pressure and warm feeling created by the pajama simulates a calm hug. Mother also sends the child a sweet dreams message by changing the color of the flower accessory on the pajama. Hugging between parents and child strengthens the bond between them, giving a message of warmth, happiness, and love. Hugging Pajama makes this possible by building a bridge over any distance.
So another important part of this research is actually based on looking at signs. So you can see in this example, not only was communication from the physical touch, but also we developed the color-changing material. So the idea is that parents could send a message by subtly changing the color of the children's clothes. But I'm still looking at how this can really effectively make communication. This goes back to kind of signs. So in environment, people can see sign and they can get some understanding. Could be emotional understanding, but it's still not established. How could we? For example, what colour corresponds to what emotion? This is some work which still has to be looked at in detail. Currently, I'm working with a professor in our psychology department who's also happens to be independently interested in artificial touch. And so, together with that professor, we're doing psychological experiments to compare effect on humans between real touch and mediated touch. And we're doing four versions of the test: no touch, actual touch, real touch by friend, mediated touch by friend, and the fourth case is computer touch, which means just random computer touching. And we want to see the effect of that on the human. And this work is based on some previous work by that professor in psychology, which he showed that touch by a friend has the effect of lowering fear arousal of the one being touched. Actually, currently, right now, we're doing this test. Well, my students are doing the test in the lab. I think the very final work I want to show in the last few minutes is so these systems. I realised that a transfer of empathy is one of the essential points. How can we transfer empathy between people using remote media? And so in this system here, I wanted to directly study, can we create media to directly invoke empathy in humans? And then I want to use this in further systems for communication. But in the first step, I wanted to consider issues which is very important for humanity now, which is the environment. And to see, can we create media which could invoke empathy to issues about the environment by directly that media also being an environmental artifact, a living object. And this is based on some previous theory by psychologists that living things evoke emotions and promote empathy. And different emotions are evoked based on the state of a living being. Actually, this is kind of related to the previous work where it was showed that virtual pets didn't provoke the same response as real pets, even if they were very similar. Okay. So one of the examples, for example, people tend to act differently if for example, it's birthday or anniversary. If you receive a plastic flower, somehow, even though that could be almost perfect reproduction, it has a different empathetic effect than real flower, even though the real flower will die. And so the motivation is using this idea that living media can promote empathy is to create media which will promote human empathy, about social and organic happenings around a person's life, especially environmental issues. And to represent these semantically, so the idea is to have a kind of impedance matching, maybe it's an engineering term, but impedance matching between the data, in this case environment, and the media itself. The first work that I did with my students was actually quite simple, just making a display from E. coli bacteria inserted with the glowing fluorescent gene, and then to change the glow rate over time. By the way, I'm not a biologist, so we had to work with some biology professor and a couple of the students actually to make the system. So the next step after that, I thought, can we make it higher order, for example, plant? Actually, I wanted to see, can we do this with plants or flower? And then I thought we could use cabbage, red cabbage, which can change the colour according to the pH level. Of course, the time rate is very slow. We're talking about millihertz, right? So hours and days before you see any noticeable effect. But that's okay for such a system because environmental parameters also do not change so fast. And to quantify this information digitally and couple it into the colour change of cabbage. So here's the basic idea. Traditional media through a computer. So here we have environmental issues, and we want to provoke an empathetic factor in the human. And so the hypothesis is that empathetic media will have some gain in the empathy in the human, related to traditional media. And this is the basic system here, where we have any digital data, but in this case it should be specifically about the environment. We have a control system, and we have a cabbage in pH-controlled solution. And it can, of a slow time frame, change the colour. And here you can see the scenario. Now we can have a kind of 6-pixel display of information. So another important thing is such living media can be easily blended into the environment and become ubiquitous. Okay, so what time is okay? So do I have 2 more minutes or okay? So I'll show the very last video. Oh, video's gone. Okay. By the way, this this kind of work raises on ethical issues. So I think this should not be done for animals, but just plants. But we have to, when we do this kind of work, we have to really consider such issues. Anyway, so here's the last video.
In the 21st century, plants should be the organizational model for life. This can yield new models of interactive computing, which brings humans and media into a symbiotic relationship with the natural world. Living media can take the form of any organism that changes under controlled conditions.
By the way, all the
research shows that we make stronger connections to living creatures than artificial imitations. If we receive a plastic flower, we don't have the same emotional connection as compared to a real flower, which makes a special impression on our senses. We recognize and build on the strengths of the sympathy response with real living media. Our living media makes empathetic connections. An impedance match is made between the important issues in the world and the color-changing properties of red cabbage.
It's time-lapse video. It is very phase rate of change.
In this case, the media is living. It can grow, decay, and change to various hues of color. We propose for this to be impedance matched with digitally measured information, including social, human, and ecological issues. The control system varies the pH level of the solution containing the cabbage at appropriate levels to change the color according to the set point provided by the computer system. The control system senses the pH value of the cabbage and then determines the difference to be corrected in order to reach that set point. It then activates the pump for either the acid or base solution to make the appropriate correction. A special flavin in the cabbage changes color depending on the pH level. An acidic solution changes the color from pink to purple, and an alkali solution will provide a change of color through pink to green. Varying hues of color along the pH range allow for rich visualization of information.
We're running out of time, so... Okay, I have no time to show you these slides, so... Okay, I think I should skip this for another time. I will say thank you very much.